So, folks, there is a guy named Curtis Yarvin, and Curtis Yarvin is a fascist. He is a guy who believes in kind of this cloud fascism type idea, and has written extensively about how, he wants to have fascist military police essentially occupy towns in the name of technocratic billionaires who are just going to rule as kind of like techno god kings, essentially wielding technology as one might a magic scepter in the world of D&D's Dark Sun. And that sounds maybe hyperbolic and yet and stupid even, and you'd be right, but that's what he believes. So let's take a look. I found that he had a debate recently with Professor Danielle Allen with the Harvard Faculty Club on the topic of democracy, and I figure, worth checking it out, seeing what happens. Let's jump in, shall we? Okay, well-produced intro. I don't care though. Sorry.
Club would just like to issue very briefly. I'd like to thank our speakers, Professor Daniel Allen, Curtis Yarvin. I'd like to thank the folks from the Harvard Faculty Club that enabled this to happen. All I've basically got to say is remain respectful. Disruptive behavior, by and large, won't be tolerated. Anyhow, for a brief introduction,
I love that he's like, yeah, disrespectful behavior won't be tolerated. Anyway, hi everyone, I'm a fascist. I would just like to say I would see you all subjugated and turned into breeding stock to create the next generation of workers for our great technocratic overlords. Okay, what about democracy? It sucks and should die. All right, next question.
Professor Allen is a
Carvin says, thank you very much for the raid.
Of the Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation, a political philosopher, ethicist, and public policy expert. She's also a nonprofit leader, democracy advocate, tech ethicist, and author. Her work can be found in The Atlantic, as well as The Washington Post, among other places. She led Harvard's Edmund and Lilly Center for Ethics previously, developed the roadmap to pandemic resilience during COVID, and ran for Massachusetts governor back in 2022. Her scholarship focuses on the reinvigoration of democracy, civic engagement, and institutional reform. Her most recent book, Justice by Means of Democracy, underpins this with The Radical Duke, forthcoming in 2026, if I have that right. Other works include Our Declaration and Democracy in the Time of Coronavirus.
Curtis Yarvin can't, unfortunately, bring his various manifestos with because it would make him look like the Unabomber.
Curtis Guy Yarvin is an American blogger, political theorist, and software developer known by his pen name Mencius Moldbug. He attended Brown University and was influenced by Silicon Valley's libertarian tech culture in the 1990s and thinkers like Ludwig von Mises, Murray Rothbard, Thomas Carlyle, and Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Yes, Mencius Moldbug, aka potential friend of channel favorite What If Alt Hist.
Yarvin developed a critical stance against democratic systems, particularly after reading Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed back in 2001. Yarvin is a founder...
Wait, we're talking about Moldbug? Is this guy? This is the guy.
...of the so-called neo-reactionary movement, or the Dark Enlightenment, alongside Warwick philosopher Nick Land. He wrote the blog Unqualified Reservations, advocating for replacing American democracy with an accountable monarchy or corporate-style governance, critiquing liberalism.
Yeah, he's not a particularly smart man, guys. This guy genuinely, when he talks about wanting to do like a fascist takeover of America, what he intended for like the Trump administration to do in his ideal world is to, start slaughtering US journalists. unironically. Like he wants like actual concentration camps and views the Trump administration as a failure because we don't have masses of them currently here in the United States for political dissidents.
As a pervasive system he terms the cathedral. In 2002, Yarvin found the Urbit networked computing platform. Curtis Yarvin published selections from his blog, Unqualified Reservations, with Passage Press in 2023, and published his first original...
Who is he? Hitler Jr.? I mean, like, in his fantasies, yeah, probably.
...book, Fascicle 1, Disturbance, with Passage. So I'd like to welcome both of our speakers for a spirited debate.
Yeah, he's a nasty fucker, exactly. He would be laughed out of any, like, sensible establishment and treated with the utmost disdain in any kind of sane world. However, he has for somehow gained the ears while penning under his pseudonym of billionaires who really love his ideas because his ideas are make them god kings. So that's, you know, obviously attractive to the people who would become god kings.
I figure we ought to get into the first topic very briefly in terms of the format. There will be 2 resolutions, each which should last for about 30 minutes, with both speakers going back and forth. After those 2 topics are discussed sufficiently, closing remarks will proceed. So the first matter, resolved. The long-term stability and flourishing of our society is better secured by concentrated executive authority than by democratic institutions. Perhaps for a first statement, Professor Allen.
By the way, I love this idea, you know? I love that it's currently the year 2025 and we're like relitigating whether or not like having, you know, monarchies is good. You know, like we're genuinely having to discuss what people fought for thousands of years to undo and reform into democracy. You know, like, well, yeah. Look, just because millions and millions and millions of people died in order to establish democratic rule by, you know, the people, you know, like maybe we should go back to that thing that, you know, it took millions of people dead before we changed. I don't know, just spitballing here.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, David. Glad to be here. And thanks to all of you for turning out. You've got dark enlightenment and bright enlightenment. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I'm not.
And I'd like to share a little bit
kind of
about where I come from in answering this question. You heard in the introduction that I am a combination of Harvard prof and democracy advocate. Folks often ask me, what exactly do you do, Danielle, with all of those different balls being juggled? And the answer is simply I work on democracy, past, present, and future, with no question mark at the end of that. That's a focus I come by super honestly. It's a matter of family inheritance, for starters. My dad's dad, my granddad on my dad's side, helped found one of the first NAACP chapters in Northern Florida in the 40s. Northern Florida at that time was just pretty much the same as Southern Georgia. So it was super dangerous. Lynchings were on the rise. He took his life into his hands to secure the right to vote. On my mom's side, my great-granddad marched with suffragettes on Boston Common in 1917. My great-grandmother ended up as president of the League of Women Voters in Michigan in the 30s. And this was because they believe that empowerment is the bedrock for human thriving and well-being. So I was fortunate to acquire that commitment and view as a young person growing up in my family. No surprise in that context, I took...
This is going to be a weird conversation because Curtis Yarvin essentially believes that people need masters. Like he describes society being essentially split into masters and slaves, and like, you know, it's gonna get real uncomfortable is my prediction.
Took that for granted. I took democracy's value for granted as a young person. And of course, as I came of age, watched my own generation come up in the world, the question of democracy's value got a lot more complicated. I watched a real parting of ways, parting of experience. I have had incredible opportunities, immense privilege here in the cathedral. and as well having had siblings as well who have thrived and so forth. At the same time, though, I have cousins, kids I used to run around the streets playing football with who aren't here any longer for all the hardest things: substance use disorder, incarceration, gun violence. And I hit a point in 2009, I lost my youngest cousin, where I started banging my head against the wall and thinking, democracy is not supposed to be abstractly valuable. Yes, we embrace these ideals of freedom and equality, but the entire point is that when we do, it delivers a society that makes it possible for every generation to do a bit better than the previous, and also for a whole cohort to come up together. And so I started working on this question of how to change the dynamic of our democracy so that it could actually deliver on the promise of democracy. And that work took me in the first instance into criminal justice reform, trying really hard to change criminal justice reform policy. And it doesn't take very long if you try to actually fix something to discover that even if you've got common sense, cross-partisan solutions, it's really hard to get things through because of governance dysfunction. And at this point, I suppose along this path, I had a philosopher dad. I know Curtis had a philosopher.
Yeah, also, can we just real quick, if you guys thought when I brought up like that master-slave dichotomy that he takes very seriously, if you heard me say that, and your first thought wasn't, wait a minute, what does he think about race? He thinks that black people are far less intelligent than white people. And he actively opposes civil rights programs that, like what her grandfather started in Florida. So, this is gonna get uncomfortable relatively quickly. Once he starts talking, anyway. And I think she knows that. I think her body language to me kind of indicates that, she's ready for a fight.
For Dad too, there's a lot of similarity.
And no, he's not South African, he's American.
Point. And then here we part ways. Curtis sees this kind of moment in American experience, and he says, look, people, the whole history before 20th century, it's all about absolute monarchy.
Wait, do I have a source for what? Is this Jubilee? No. His views on race? Yeah. Let me pull it up real quick. Here is an article from 2016. Speaker Curtis Yarvin's racial views bring controversy to Boulder Conference. Let's take a look here. Yarvin's views, which some have alleged are racist and endorse the institution of slavery, already have led for him to be kicked out of the conference in 2015. There's been pressure on Lambda Conf to do the same. Well, let's see. Yes, his views that white people are genetically smarter than black people. That's generally one of the things here. Let's take a look here. Yarvin's talk was submitted and approved anonymously. Yarvin himself wrote a blog post in which he stated he would not be discussing his political views at the conference. He has denied it, and yet he wrote it under his pen name, Mendacious Moldbug. If I can find a better article. I want, actual comments. Let's see. Yeah, many of his writings under the synonymous Mendacious Moldbug, my bad, convey blatantly racist views. He expresses the belief that white people are genetically endowed with higher IQs than black people. He suggested race may determine whether individuals are better suited for slavery, and his writing has been interpreted as supportive of the institution of slavery, and he publishes all of this in very long and winding and meandering blog posts that are frankly insufferable. I know that because I've looked at them, and they are lengthy and designed to waste your time unless you already, to some degree, buy into his fascistic ideas. If you want, sometime we can go over one of them, but I understand that it's going to be long, arduous, and kind of like going through a Jordan Peterson hour-long talk. If Jordan Peterson was more circumspect and explicitly more racist and fascist. Why are they even giving this guy the time of day? Because this guy has unfortunately caught the ear of billionaires because his fascistic ideas are essentially, hey, we should have technocratic god kings. And it turns out that the technocrats and the wealthy people who run Silicon Valley really like those ideas. Are they referring to the guy in the middle? No. The guy on the right, or the left side. No, their left side, our right side. I don't know, did that clear things up? Was that a sufficient source? Do we need to, like, go into, like, his actual writings? Like, I guess we can. Like, I don't know, he once wrote, it should be obvious that although I'm not a white nationalist, I'm not exactly allergic to the stuff. 2009, he wrote that civil rights programs were applied to populations with recent hunter-gatherer ancestry and no great reputation for sturdy moral fiber. And that the result of giving black people the right to vote was absolute human garbage. Like, I don't know, like, we could get deeper into it, but, like, he's like he has written posts denying that he's a white nationalist or anti-Semitic, but, like, he constantly appeals to those ideas because, you know, he's a fascist and a liar.
Monarchs, absolute rule, delivering for people. It's about absolute monarchs who operated in a context of belief in racial hierarchy. They delivered for people in the same way that corporations did, with the mission of maximizing their capital. Their capital is land and people. Because of wanting to invest in land and people, and because of believing in racial hierarchies, they embrace racial.
The extent is basically he would be Calvin Candy in Django Unchained. That's the extent to which he's a racist.
Cleansing, and that's what you've got to do to have a society that's going to deliver for people. And so Curtis's view is that our 20th century world is founded on lies, the lies of egalitarianism and the lies that democracy can actually deliver for people. And because it's founded on those lies, he thinks it's foundering. He thinks we need regime change. He thinks we need an absolute monarch, unaccountable, no separation of powers, no checks and balances, no limits, and so forth. Could be Trump. We kind of elected him. Maybe that's already happening. That's what Curtis says in his book. Could be Musk. He doesn't say that in his book, but he has said that previously. Hard to say. Trump, Musk, I don't know, duck, rabbit, one or the other. One of them, anyway, is in charge, going to run things for us and make everything better. Now, clearly, we part ways in that question of how to respond to the current moment. Why? Partly that history is false in his book. It is not the case that autocracies over the course of history have delivered good for human beings. They have consistently violated freedom. And I will come back to that point. I want you to focus on the idea of freedom and what it is worth to you. The second point is that egalitarianism is not the weak-minded invention of the 20th century. Egalitarianism has been with us for millennia, has been growing in force, goes all the way back to antiquity. Christianity extended it. Already in the early 1600s, you had indentured servants.
You know, you can say, like, the point should be, like, embarrass and humiliate him, and, like, you should do that. But also, this is, like, a Harvard faculty debate. You know, like, they're not going to do that here. In a just society, like, half that crowd would be coming in with rotted tomatoes that to pelt him with.
Who struck for the right to vote in Jamestown. That same spirit showed up in Plymouth. Ditto the spirit of...
Why debate this guy is my question. Well, because unfortunately, this guy's ideas undergird, like, the entirety of, like, the tech part of society's fascination with fascism. Debating this guy is actually kind of a necessary thing to do. It is necessary to check this guy's ideas because stupid people listen to him. And, like, people who don't have enough of a grounding in history, or people who are, frankly, uneducated in a number of different ways, they just, like, absorb what he says because, like AI, he is just confidently wrong all the time. And, like, that confidence convinces a lot of people that what he's saying has merit, and it just absolutely does not.
Egalitarianism for all human creatures, Africans as well as everybody else. The Declaration of Independence was earnest in its commitment to equality. It led to the abolition of enslavement in Massachusetts, as well as in Pennsylvania and Vermont before the end of the Revolutionary War. Rhode Island had already objected, or rather rejected.
I believe Project 2025 and Curtis Yarvin are two different things. Project 2025 is backed by, like, a lot of the mainstream Republican think tanks, whereas Curtis Yarvin is basically like an alt-right Nazi-adjacent blogger who wrote about how cool it would be if, like, tech bros seized control of either the entire country or vast swaths of it and turned them into tiny techno-feudalistic empires. And that's kind of like, that appeals to the tech guys far more than Project 2025. Project 2025 is more of a vehicle of like more mainstream capital as well as like Christian nationalists, right? And so like Curtis Yarvin is kind of a different thing. I know that this is weird, but like we've talked about Balaji Srinivasan before on this show. We've gone over like several of his long form videos describing his ideology. And like he talks a lot about Curtis Yarvin, right? Because there is this entire like sphere of tech philosophers, and I'm using the term philosopher here very, very generously because they're all morons, that basically sell their ideas to billionaires, and then these billionaire patrons essentially like lavish them with gifts and wealth and power and introduce them to all of their wealthy friends, and like essentially like because the ideas of these fascistic little weasels is basically, hey, what if we gave you, Mr. Billionaire Man, all of the power instead of just some of it? And, the billionaires like that idea because they want all of the power and all of the money, not just some of it.
Rejected racial hierarchy before the Revolutionary War. In other words, it is not a weak-minded idea of the 20th century. What it does, rather, is reflect the claim of ordinary people to freedom. That's all.
Well, yeah, the techno-fiefdom sounds like a libertarian wet dream. Exactly, Bill Casey. And that's why these tech bros love it. Because they get to make the rules, and they are way too smart and handsome and big dicked to make any bad decisions.
Oh, it's that simple. That's what egalitarianism means. Freedom is both the power to steer my own life in my private circumstances and to contribute with others to steering the public life and shape that constrains us all, the norms and laws. If you love freedom, there is only one possibility, because
Is Curtis Milo Yiannopoulos adjacent? No, Milo Yiannopoulos is like a very, very tiny part of... You could either consider him part of like the Christian nationalist wing or like, I don't know, kind of the Yi wing of the Republican movement, like just kind of like doing fucking crazy fascist Nazi shit, like while trying to cling to some degree of relevance.
Every unaccountable, and no absolute power is ever accountable. That's the definition of absolute power, is it is not accountable. No absolute power is ever accountable. Absolute power inevitably corrupts, tramples on, persecutes freedom. So the question that we have right now is not whether to have democracy and the protection of freedom, but only how to have that. The only question is, can we redesign our institutions to achieve that? And we can. And the single most useful thing that we could immediately do is party reform. Get rid of party primaries, get rid of the capture of power by political parties that work on the basis of a shrinking base of population to control our institutions. We, the people, need our power back. And with that, we can, in fact, redesign our institutions for effective functioning.
Thank you, Professor Allen. Mr. Yarvin, your response and your own presentation.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who made this event possible. Professor Allen, of course, showed a lot of courage here and a lot of hard work. I'd like to also thank, Harvard University. We're not supposed to mention the name of the school.
I should check out that Behind the Bastards episode on Curtis Yarvin. I haven't yet. I haven't. I've been spending a lot of time listening to like law and lawyer podcasts recently. But I should do more Behind the Bastards in my rotation.
Unclear.
Unclear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this possible, including the school where we are, including Passage Press, my publisher, including the John Adams Society, woohoo, out there in the public. And yeah, I think it's sort of a great opportunity to kind of test my views against Professor Allen. I guess I would say, I grew up
Nice.
in a sort of very different context. I grew up.
I might check out that Leah Miller video. as well. We'll see. I should know more about this guy than I do, but like mostly I know he's a fascist and he sucks. I know a few other things too, but like so much has been going on.
Inside what's called the deep state sometimes, because my father was a foreign service officer and my mother worked at the DOE, and my stepfather actually worked on the Hill for many years and now teaches at Hopkins SAIS. And he worked for Biden actually for a while. And when I observed sort of the underbelly of this system from the inside, it did not seem to have very much to do with the kind of abstractions that Professor Allen talks about. And so in a way, I have kind of
That's actually a great question, Plant. How do y'all decompress from this gross shit that's going on in the world? I have been running on an elliptical. That helps me a lot because this kind of shit triggers my fight or flight, and it helps to just act out the flight, you know? You act out the flight, then you eat like some tasty shit. It's real good. Oh yeah, no, like he's absolutely a major player, Amber Brains. And the terrifying thing is that people with significantly deep pockets are backing his ideas and giving them credence. And so like it's frustrating as hell. But unfortunately he's very dangerous. And like I understand that, but I've covered a lot of the people in his orbit because people have been talking about him more prominently. So, again, that's why I talked about Balaji Srinivasan months ago. I think last summer, I was talking about Balaji Srinivasan. But, yeah, Curtis Yarvin, people have been talking about him more and more. And, you know, frankly, one of the vibes that I've been getting from some of the coverage that I've been reading of him, I think he's genuinely afraid at this point of some kind of retribution against him, like some kind of Nuremberg style, like, hey, you know, justice is coming type movement, because he's pretty upset that the fascism isn't way more advanced in this country than he hoped it would be. I don't know. I hope that continues to frustrate him, is all I can say.
Preliminary responses to Professor Allen's narrative. One is that, you know, reading her book, and I was reading, you know, Democracy is a Path to Justice? Is the
Other way around, my friend.
Justice is a Path to Democracy.
Justice by means of democracy.
Justice by means of democracy. And you know, reading that, I was sort of like, it made me feel like I was reading, in a way, a work of Islamic history that was written by a Muslim. And I'm like, you know, because this is someone who believes entirely in the system that she's describing. And so, not to, of course, you know, have any negative discussion of the Muslim faith, but the thing is, if I'm reading a Muslim history of, say, the Abbasids of Damascus in the 9th century, written by a Muslim, I expect them to be very concerned with, is this the true caliph? Is this the real Islam? And so on and so forth. None of which, as a non-Muslim, are questions that really...
You know, like, this is what I mean by, like, his disgustingness kind of coming out in the course of a conversation, like it's kind of inevitable. But, like, for example, you can just talk about, like, historical perspectives, right? But his go-to for a historical perspective is like a very specific time, place, and perspective, you know? That like comes out of left field and is frankly tinged with xenophobia and racism, right? Because you can talk about that far more prominently in our context about like, I don't know, abbots or friars or various Christian denominations or sects writing histories of the times. You know, what the fuck is he talking about? He's talking about the fact that, like, if you're someone who writes a history does so from a certain perspective. But he's saying it in a racist way because he's racist as fuck. That's it.
Really relate to me. And so when I read, for example, A Justice by Means of Democracy, I sort of notice every chapter starting with, you know, there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. And I'm like, I get it, this is what you believe in. But these abstractions seem uncorrelated with the realities. And what this reminded me the most, besides this observation about Islamic history, is it reminded me of one of the books that I really learned political philosophy from, because I'm an adherent of what's called the Italian school of political philosophy. And there was a great introduction to this, which I found by chance in a used bookstore, which is...
Nah, that dude, what's really cringe is coming into chat like 2 hours after we had the discussion, and then not even having the chutzpah to like say porn. Like, how childish do you have to be? Are you 12? Are you too young to be using YouTube? Get the fuck off. Get your mom or dad, like, have them like do better monitoring of your like internet usage. You're 24. You're a 24-year-old man, I presume, and you can't say the word porn? What's wrong with you? Like, you realize that's worse, right? You realize like it's worse that you're like coming in here as an adult man afraid to say the word pornography. Like, at least a 12-year-old has like an excuse. You're all gooners, get help. Like, dude, you're so pathetic you can't even say the word. Like, you're happily saying the word you're happily saying a word that means jerking it off. But like, you can't say porn. You understand the double standard here, right? Like, Jesus Christ, dude. Stop being pathetic. You actually have the choice between being cool and being pathetic. And you're choosing to be pathetic. You just stop. You can say porn. Nothing bad is gonna happen. Like, man, if you're gonna call yourself a dude on the internet, at least act like a dude, you know?
James Burnham's The Machiavellians. And The Machiavellian starts with, I think, one of the great political essays of all time, which it is a takedown of Dante. And it is a review of Dante's book, De Monarchia. And Burnham, who was at the time metamorphosing from a Trotskyist into a neocon, and he was one of the first to make that transformation. This book is written in 1940. Looks at this, he reads De Monarchia, which is a book of political theory by none other than Dante, and he summarizes the arguments of De Monarchia in a way that sort of describes these kind of very, very lofty abstractions. And then he's like, all right, you can't even process these abstractions. Let's process the reality. And so the reality is, instead of talking about abstractions, what Dante is really talking about is the conflict between two political factions, known as the white Guelphs and the black Guelphs, I believe. And all of these abstractions are basically Dante's way of saying, I forget if this is the white Guelphs or the black Guelphs that Dante is a member of, but it sort of reduces to a very specific set of...
Wow. Okay. All right. Okay. Fuck. All right. So I just have to say, like, it is pretty funny to hear this guy approach interpreting a pretty straightforward text. And like, he's Jordan Peterson in it. He's Jordan Peterson in it. It's silly as hell.
Of political behaviors. So I think when I looked at sort of the reality...
Yeah, exactly, Draco Gene. Intellectualism is when I have one long, unrestrained run-on sentence.
In which I lived, I noticed sort of abstractions like democracy that are used in ways that, seem very... I think tendentious is not too, difficult to word. And so, for example, when I read Professor Allen's, definition of democracy, she seems to define democracy, almost the word, the symbol, as a good. And then defining the symbol, what constitutes democracy, it's not simply having elections, it's principles like difference without domination, it's basically principles of like, you can't be a democracy just having elections and electing leaders who, take office and exercise power because they won the election. That's not democracy. Oh no, democracy.
Can we just take a moment where his criticism of her book is that it has a point of view. His criticism of her book is that it has a point of view that it advocates for. That's what tendentious means. Okay, that's what it means. Well, you see, she wrote a book in which she wasn't an unbiased observer, unlike myself. Her book was seeking to make a point, and it's just like, well, what the hell? Yeah, that's people write books to make points. That very good. You nailed it.
Democracy is sort of all of these intangible things that go along with this. And I'm like, is this the world's longest case of no true Scotsman? Because actually, if I'm going about to defining a Scotsman, I might say it's someone who was born in Scotland or someone who's a Scottish citizen or sort of simple cases like this.
I'm sorry, you came back to talk. I'm sorry. I'm real sorry. That dude, you came back to talk about how you don't get laid in your own relationship with your own girlfriend because she's too busy reading smut. My guy, that's not the reason you're not getting laid. Also, honestly, if this is an elaborate joke, my hats off to you, sir. Hats off to you. That's actually very, very funny. And I appreciate you joking on all of us with that cell phone. I've actually now flipped from thinking that you were here to troll, and now I think you're here to have fun and goof off. And I like that. I commend you for this goofery you have concocted.
And when I define democracy, I'm like, there's a very simple question. How democratic is this country? And my answer to that is simply taking this, not, going back and separating the is-ought distinction and saying, I'm like, how much power do the voters have? If the voters have no power at all, for example, in the EU, they'll frequently talk of the democratic deficit, indicating that actually the parliament, the European Parliament that's elected by the voters, is almost entirely symbolic and has no power. And actually, the real Europe is run by the European Commission, which is accountable to nobody, like the Supreme Court. And so actually, or like Harvard. And so, what we see people defending when they defend democracy.
And Curtis Yarvin has a brilliant solution to this problem. If all these institutions are secretly undemocratic, well then, you see, we merely have to make the most undemocratic system of government and get the right people in charge, and then we'll be all right. Then we'll be all right. Excellent work. Which, by the way, is the argument every fascist has. Every fascist is, look, we're going to have an authoritarian government, but plot twist time, we're going to have the right guy in charge, and he's going to lead us to an age of unparalleled glory. And then, when he gets old and dies, he's going to pass it on to, another person who is, the perfect guy, and just going to lead us into another golden age. And it's just going to work like that forever, you see, because we're just going to have the right guys this time. It's like that Arrested Development bit where they talk about, wanting to have an open marriage. I wonder if I can just pull that up real quick.
Well, did it work for those people?
No, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might,
Oh,
but...
please. Someone milk that dude.
No.
But it might work for us.
That's every single fascist, by the way. Complete with the dude milking. Because, fascists are horribly insecure.
Democracy, so-called, is they'll use terms like civil society, or they'll say our institutions. And these things seem to me to have nothing at all to do with...
The EU Commission is literally just a council of people from each country's parliament. We literally elected those guys, just not on an EU level. I hate these ghouls misrepresenting the EU. Well, yeah, but understand that the Curtis Yarvin audience doesn't know shit. So basically, this guy just says things, and his audience believes them and never fact checks, obviously, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, of course, the EU's socialist. Socialisms. They never do that. It's all socialism. Yeah, of course. No democracy really under socialism. And all these golden ages are the best plans. They've been looking into it, and it's coming. It's a concept of a plan. Exactly. The best concept of the best plan.
Giving power to elections. So, for example, I may be somewhere in the book, but I did not find any recognition in Professor Allen's book of the fact that the House of Representatives, the so-called home of democracy as defined by the founders, has a 98% incumbency rate. Or that if you're a freshman representative in the House of Representatives, you start at the very bottom. And so actually it seems to me that if I look at the real Congress, this is actually a buffer against democracy, against populism, as you might say, because when I hear the word populism, I view that as a synonym for democracy. And no, I don't think of it as a good thing.
Populism is not a synonym for democracy. But okay, I would also say that like issues with like representation or democratic representation are one thing that you can fix through reforms. Okay, you can fix those kinds of things through reforms. The issue that keeps us from fixing those things is capitalism, right? The commodification of these political offices. What he winds up doing here is essentially just being like, yeah, so we should just throw, this thing is flawed, so we should just throw it all in the garbage. All of it in the garbage. Your colleges, garbage. Your Congress, garbage. Your presidency, well, maybe we can keep that, but, maybe we'll call it a king. It's just, this is just him saying, let's take this thing that is flawed and just destroy it because, wouldn't it be better, to just have a king make all of your decisions for you? You secretly desire to be ruled, after all. You are secretly a subby little wubby.
And so actually that difference over the meaning of the word democracy seems to me to be what we should focus on tonight.
Yeah, because he would really like it to be that conversation instead.
Professor Allen, your response?
Well,
let's get bogged down into the semantics rather than into the actual substance of the issue.
Starters, I appreciate so much that you've understood that there's conviction in my book. You're quite right that there is conviction in my book. Nihilistic narcissism is not my jam. Maybe yours. It's not my jam. So let's talk about democracy specifically.
I like her. I like her a lot. I wasn't expecting her to be as pugilistic as she is, and honestly, I'm here for it. That's the exact kind of energy that that is needed here.
And in order to do that, we have to dig deeper into the meaning of freedom and also the meaning of equality and precisely what it is we're trying to protect. As I begin to do that, let me though also say, I also think there's a problem with the incumbency rate, for sure. Why did I? Oh yeah,
the thing, Plant, for me, the thing that I want to really emphasize about literally all these fascist clowns, right, is that they are not smart. They write a lot of shit and they have a lot of aims and goals, but it all boils down to really just, we want to consolidate power and hey, let's get rich while we do it. And maybe we'll make some other people around us rich. And the incentive structure of society is kind of geared towards, under capitalism, getting rich. So that has an inbuilt impetus to get a bunch of people cooperating at these high end levels of society, right? And so when we're talking about this, it's not that they are all coordinating with each other. It's not that they are all deeply in tune and following some grand plan that they've masterminded for years. It is simply the next step on their incentivized run towards an authoritarian form of governance, right? They are just, essentially morons following a track laid out for them by the capitalistic tendency to accumulate power towards the top of society, right? And to undo regulations. And so I genuinely, there are a few people in this space where they do possess a cunningness, an intelligence to them, right? One of those people would be Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is a smart guy, and that's what makes him scary, right? I find him to be a a particularly Nurgle-infested elderly man, grotesque even, but like he's smart. And the issue is with a lot of these thinkers, or with Trump and the people in Trump's orbit, they're not smart, right? And that might be our saving grace. That a lot of these people are just not smart, and they are doing essentially primitive accumulation versus actually trying to enact ideological goals other than those that are given to them by their big money donors. And so, like, that might save us in the long run here. You think Zinch is the chaos god of Steve Bannon? I don't know. He fucking looks like a moldering corpse.
Highlight party reform, precisely because we don't really have competitive elections any longer. So I agree that in many ways our democracy is not functioning to the standard of democracy. Again, that's where we agree. The divergence is in whether the question is regime change to unaccountable CEO monarchs, Trump and Musk, or renovating our democracy. Now, again, back to the root and to the meaning. One of the things that Mr. Yarvin likes to focus on and insist on is that human difference is fundamental, and that we should organize our way of thinking about society based on structures of, again, racial hierarchy. And he introduces DNA as the proof of that point. Now, and he introduces these points as
eugenics, baby,
as refutations of egalitarianism. Egalitarianism precedes human difference. There is no such thing as human difference without the category of the human, right? Now, what is it about the category of the human that we are all members of? That category captures the fact that each of us is a judging creature. We have moral capacity, and we're all trying to make tomorrow better than yesterday. We choose moment by moment, day by day, because we're trying to make tomorrow better than yesterday. In choosing being moral creatures, we are activating our freedom, expressing our desire for it. It is the core of our basic human dignity and what requires protection in order to achieve human flourishing. That is the fundamental ground, the conviction. So yes.
I want to know what's going on in this guy's head. Like, he's like perpetually frowning, and I don't like. I should be commenting on what she said, but like I agree with like all of it. I think that she made a really good and kind of beautiful point. But like this guy frowning throughout the entire thing, really, like I don't know how to interpret that. Hey, admin, welcome. What the fuck did I join? A debate between Danielle Allen, a professor at Harvard, and some douchebag named Curtis Yarvin.
There is conviction in my book, 100%. But that conviction is grounded on recognizing, again, that human equality precedes human difference. Now, this is not to say that we are all the same. To the contrary, we come in all kinds of different sizes and shapes and colors and capacities and etc. We are so various, and that is the beauty of humanity. But we can talk about and appreciate human difference only because of human equality. And then also we have to recognize, of course, that groups are changeable and various, that how people connect evolves over time, and it is impossible to say what strivings and what talents land where within the population. And the only way we can maximize the value of human beings is to maximize our protection of freedom. That's it. And so, what protects freedom? Governing ourselves in our private sphere and governing together with others in the public sphere. And there's only one name for that: democracy. All the rest is a question of engineering. That is what he's really asking about. Mr. Yarvin here is really asking questions about engineering. And yes, we have a heck of a lot of engineering improvements to bring to our democracy.
Mr. Yarvin, a question for you.
I think that was a bit charitable to Curtis Yarvin's positions, to be honest, in a way that he doesn't deserve.
Obviously, this topic of accountability within your proposed system, that's obviously a question everyone has. You know, how you deal with that problem, namely, how do you make some kind of strong executive, how do you hold him accountable? Properly speaking.
I thought that was the second part of the debate.
No, the second part's about Harvard itself and what Harvard represents, and you know, in
all right.
this
Well,
sort of elite formation
let me take a step back and kind of let me first respond to Professor Allen's point about equality, which consists of what I would say a lot of relatively unfalsifiable abstractions. To slightly sharpen the point, I would say that if we consider the statement, all men or all human beings are created equal, we can consider that as an abstract expression of philosophy, as a kind of confession of religious faith, or we can consider that as an empirical statement.
Yeah, he's dodging the question. He's using pedantry and semantics to just kind of dodge addressing the subject of the actual conversation. This is, frankly speaking, cowardice. There's no real other way of framing what he's doing. It's just cowardice in order to maintain face, in front of his audience that they're relying on him to rebut these ideas. He's not going to be able to, because his positions are fundamentally, die for your masters, you slaves. And every single guy who listens to this person, and it's mostly guys, they view themselves as the masters. None of these guys who read Curtis Yarvin are like, yes, we are the slaves. They look at themselves as masters. Even the people who are non-billionaires who get sucked in by his ideology, right? Well, yes, in Path Test, these wealthy elites don't consistently plan together. I'm just saying capitalism provides essentially a wide path in this direction.
If we were to consider it as an empirical statement, I would say, okay, if you consider that true, here's a much more true statement. All identical twins are created equal. And
what does that mean?
I mean that all identical twins are basically born genetically equal with the same capacities and the same needs and the same goals. I completely reject the idea that all human beings are, sure, we have many things in common, but
also, wait, that's just not true. Identical twins aren't born equal. That's just not true. The idea that identical twins are equal in all things the second they come out of the womb is just that's not true. As soon as you come out, there are differences already. I'm sorry. The idea that they're effectively the same person is insane. No, obviously not.
The regime,
But again, this is the degree to which he oversimplifies. Because again, we're not talking about equality in the sense of genetics.
way of living, one of the basic truths of essentially classical political philosophy, which is being rediscovered to this day, is that there is no system of government that is appropriate for all peoples at all times. And, you know, as a reductio ad absurdum, I would point to the question of uncontacted tribes. Okay, what is right for the...
I'm sorry, is he saying that he's deliberately reducing this to the point of absurdity and he's still doing it anyway? Like he's pointing out the logical fallacy? That's insane.
Citizens of Greater Andaman Island. Okay, should we invade the Andaman Islands? Should we take away their bows? Should we give them the right to vote? What about the citizens of uncontacted tribes in the Amazon? Is it right for them to be basically rounded up, issued with ballots, and told to vote for the president of Brazil? Will that really be the thing that helps them, basically choosing between Lula and Bolsonaro Jr.? No, I don't think that that's what.
I'm sorry. We're talking about a social phenomenon. What you're describing here is just like politics and governance are social phenomena. And when he's talking about what if we took this incredibly weird niche example? The people you're talking about should have the right to govern themselves. Governance arises out of social necessity. So I don't know. I think amongst themselves they should vote and figure out who should be in charge. That doesn't seem that doesn't seem so hard to figure out or navigate. Frankly, if you think about it for 5 seconds.
These people need. And my standard of government goes back to Alexander Pope, who had this great line, for forms of government, let fools contest, whatever governs best is best. I think I messed that up a little. And so when I look at the objective results of governance in this country today, I can see why What If Alt Hist addressed whether or not he had been in contact with this man in the last video of his that we covered, because this guy does seem like he would go on a late night rant and claim to be Odin / Jesus on a spiritual mission to rebuild faith in the world. Like that. This guy does seem like he would do that. He seems particularly unstable. Can't help but observe, our burned out, desolate inner cities. I can't help, but observe there are numerous places in this country where you can go that were clearly flourishing 50 years ago that are no longer flourishing.
How do we hold your techno kings accountable? Identical twins Andaman Islands. Alexander Pope. So really democracy is bad actually objectively.
No, but like, for real, that is his argument, right? Like, that is his argument. And it's just, I just, thank you for the $5 super chat, Nomi Sunrider. It's just like, when I compare this guy to Jordan Peterson, I hope you guys can see the point of comparison, because like, he's generally just answering with like some of the most either of extraordinarily rambling way to get to a particularly simple point, or just like doing loop-de-loops in the middle of nowhere. He went and did donuts in the abandoned mall parking lot instead of answering the question. And like, that was a pretty straightforward question. Like, by what mechanism would your techno kings be held accountable? That you should have an answer to that. And instead, he's just like, well, I don't think there should be an accountability mechanism, actually, because, sometimes you just need an authoritarian leader because people demand the authoritarianism. And our general ennui to Curtis Yarvin, I guess, indicates the need for authoritarianism, which is, again, insane. Oh God, Banana Brains, can you put a link to that video in topic suggestions? Because I'll do it. I won't be happy, but I'll do it.
And in my standard of government, I basically return to Thomas Carlyle's idea of the condition of England question. And, this is an explicit...
He's totally the poser goth at the club or coffee shop who thinks he's an intellectual, but he creeps everyone out. Yeah, this guy would be kicked out of any self-respecting goth club for, like, I don't know, being a creepy weirdo and not respecting consent, 100% Amber Brains.
Kind of renunciation of statistics. You say that, when you consider the condition of England or the condition of anywhere...
Hey, I'm sorry, just real quick.
And, this is an explicit kind of renunciation of statistics. You say that, when you consider the condition of England or the condition of anywhere, look at them and say, how are these people living? Is the government helping them to flourish? Is it helping them to live well? I think one of the things that I noticed most...
Again, he's so far afield of the question, and the moderator just doesn't seem to give a shit. But I am going to just, like, put forward here that, like, I think that this guy is essentially doing what a lot of Republican politicians do when they go onto an antagonistic interview, which is where they get asked a very, not inappropriate question, but like a very inconvenient question. And instead of directly answering the question, they start rambling. They just start yapping. It's a self-defense mechanism for them, right? And I think that that's essentially what's happening here, where this guy is just trying to play for time. He's trying to give the longest non-answer he can to take up the most time in the debate. Because, frankly, and this would be consistent with, like, his readership base, his readers don't really care that much about the substance. What they care about is the vibe. They care about the seemingness of the answer, right? As long as the answer seems like it is confident, like it seems like it has content, then they aren't going to really examine the nitty-gritty of the actual points he's making or not making, right? They want someone to play act competence for them. And was he coached? No, I don't think he's coached. I think it's a natural inclination for someone who wants to preserve the perception of being competent. And so like I think he's just rambling. He's yapping out of self-preservation, and it probably works with people who are dumb enough to be pulled in by his bullshit, because like it's exactly how he runs his blog. He'll write like 10,000 words on like just different issues, to 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, like just lengthy, long-winded shit. And I think that carries over into just his general presentation to the world.
Closely in Professor Allen's work is that there's this returning emphasis to what might be called a positive liberty, or the liberties of the ancients, which is essentially this idea that exercising political power is a matter of birthright and is a matter of, being very important to the nature of a human being in a civilized society. I'm with Charles I on this, who said, a subject and a sovereign are clean different things. I actually believe that there is a natural desire for political power that is essential not only in our human ancestry, but actually in our simian ancestry, because we observe that chimpanzees live in a very similar way. If you want to be a chimpanzee who spreads his DNA, you better be the chief chimp. And so this desire for power, this importance, this sort of lust for mattering, everyone who writes an admissions, essay to Harvard, wants to make an impact on the world. They want to change the world. They want to do all these things. They want power. And, and for me, that desire for power, which seems to Professor Allen to be a very positive thing and a thing that is entirely benign, I see that actually as a kind of lust, really almost as a sin that is sort of caused great damage to the world and the lives of those now living.
Yeah, because, human beings are chips. We're just, human society, chimp society, same thing. Human beings and chimps, basically the same creatures. And like, it's just, her face says it all, it really does. But like, dude had no answer for, hey, do you have any kind of control on what happens if one of the techno kings does something bad that hurts everyone? For their own personal benefit. And his long, meandering answer ends in essentially, well, if you want to be like, the chimp that doesn't get fucked over, you have to become the head chimp. So like he's like, it's actually a sin, by the way, to try to be the head chimp. But we all are chimps, and if you're not the head chimp, then your life sucks, and deal with it. And that's like essentially it. That's essentially it. It's insane. And yes, it is an appeal to nature, which again, not really super applicable here. I'm a bottom chimp. I hate him. Good. Your hatred of this man and the ideas he proposes indicates that you have a functional heart and soul, to whatever degree souls exist.
I assume you'd like to respond.
I will. Is there time still? Yep. Yeah. Alrighty. No, I would like to, because I'd like to clear up a couple of confusions. So the first is about the term equality, and the second is about the term power. So, for starters, equality. Equality comes in a variety of forms. It's really important. Anytime somebody wants to talk to you about equality or egalitarianism, ask them what kind of equality they mean. They may be talking about human moral equality. They may be talking about political equality. They may be talking about social equality. They may be talking about intellectual equality. They may be talking about economic equality, etc. In other words, you don't know what somebody means by equality or egalitarianism until you ask them precisely which concept of equality they're using. Human beings are morally equal in the way that I described. We are all members of the same species. Even those identical twins are morally equal to each other. They're also equal to each other in some other ways that most other human beings are not equal to each other in, but let's not confuse our different concepts of equality. That's really important. And again, anytime you hear anybody critique egalitarianism, ask them to account for what account of equality precisely are they critiquing. And if they can't offer an accurate account of the theory of equality or egalitarianism they're critiquing, you should pass that argument by. So that's
Damn! Yeah, honestly, she just basically told that entire audience, you know, if someone doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, you maybe shouldn't take them at their word. like maybe if they don't know what they're talking about, you shouldn't listen to them. I bold words, I know, but like,
that's the first
Can
point.
I ask
Insane.
a quick check on that?
No, let me make the second point, and then you can come back, because you had a lot in what you said. So let me just make the point about power. A couple different categories here. Freedom, self-government, power, and domination. What Mr. Yarvin is attributing to me in the treatment of power is actually the concept of domination. Yes, human beings are beset with a drive to dominate others. We watch that all around us all the time.
yes, human beings are technically apes. However, I will also say that our societal structures are very different from that of apes and chimpanzees.
Probably watching it in this debate right now between the two of us, coming from both of us in relationship to each other, for sure. Human beings are beset by the desire to dominate. That is a bad feature of human beings. Why? Because the desire to dominate impedes the desire and aspiration for freedom coming from somebody else. The goal, as we seek to protect and support human flourishing, is in fact to achieve spheres of agency for ourselves, for all of us, that we all are able to be full agents. And there is only one way to do that, again, by protecting our private sphere and by giving us the opportunity to co-create the public sphere. It is the only solution to the problem of domination. So no, when I am arguing for political equality, I'm not arguing for domination. I am arguing for a sharing of power in order to protect freedom for all of us morally equal human beings.
On moral equality and power is fine.
On moral equality and power. So, you know, sort of trying to tease apart some of these, I would say, relatively tendentious definitions. First of all, there's a useful...
I love, he keeps using this word tendentious. And I think it's because he was banking on the fact that like his audience won't know what that means and is just going to nod along with him because again, it just means definitions that have a point of view. You know, like when he's saying it, it just means it has what you're saying has a point of view. And like, yeah, it does. She's arguing for her positions, just like you are. Like, it doesn't mean anything to say that they are advocating. Like, come on.
Thought experiment here. Surely Professor Allen would not expect, you know...
I'm gonna add... Why? You're gonna... Okay. Well, for one thing, what's the difference between human societies and primate societies? Well, one thing, we have more complex laws. We have more complex societies in general, like socially. We have a lot more... tools in our language vocabulary. Look, it's just our societies are more complicated. We pay taxes, chimps don't. You know, like I don't know. It's just more complicated. We have pornography. Yeah, we have pornography as well. It's just, you know, it's a thing. It's a thing. We are not technically apes. We are literally in the family of great apes.
Extend the principle of moral equality to chimpanzees. And yet chimpanzees are...
Gutsick Gibbon is great. The stamp of approval from Riverboat Jack.
They are, you know, completely related to us, all of us except, I would imagine, except Darwin in this room.
Look, I'm not talking about like being related to apes in any like near sense. I'm talking like scientifically, we belong in the Hominidae family, which is the great ape family.
And there is, of course, a continuous genetic chain of linkage that traces us back to our simian friends. And so, you know, one of the things, and actually of all people...
I'm not sure we're so great apes. We're more like mediocre apes. I like that a lot.
people who observed this. It was Stephen Jay Gould, the communist evolutionary biologist, who observed this. Harvard communist evolutionary biologist, Marxist at least, he observed, a curious fact, which is that actually there are a lot of missing links between us and the chimpanzee.
Again, why are you making appeals to chimpanzees? Chimpanzees and humans, when we're talking about fucking democracy, it's not really applicable, is it? I would love Curtis Yarvin to point at the last fucking chimpanzee congress. I would love that.
There's Homo habilis, there's Australopithecus, afarensis, and we would have a lot of trouble if those more divergent forms were living among us today of deciding, do they deserve moral equality? And so my question,
Wait, I'm sorry, would we? Would we really? Like, I'm sorry, if we had humans and slightly different looking humans, would it be that hard to treat them as, like, moral equals? No. Also, literally every single person who has ever played Dungeons and Dragons understands that you would treat them relatively the same, if not exactly the same.
A sort of thought experiment question for Professor Allen is if we were able to decode the genome of, let's say, Homo habilis, who lived, 2 million years ago, and somehow implant that in a human cell like those dire wolves you keep hearing about, and would that be a being?
Also true, Nomi Sunrider. Like, Neanderthal DNA literally continues to exist to this day within us.
With this moral equality that Professor Allen describes, because if humanness is a Boolean quality, as we say in computer science, if it's 0 or 1, there must have been a mother who was not morally equal to us, who had a child who was morally equal to us.
This is okay. How is that at all relevant to right now? Like, even if you grant what you're talking about, which I don't know why you would, but like, even if you do, that doesn't answer the question about democracy today, right? Because it's kind of like, I don't know, if you go along with his train of logic here, he's like, well, clearly there must have been a point at which there was a binary cutoff, and it's like, no, like, generally speaking, things change incrementally over time. And so, like, there was probably never a moment where, like, a human mom birthed a human child, and, like, the mom was an animal versus, like, a newly formed human. That's probably never been a thing. Like, there hasn't been that big of a differential between mother and offspring. And so, like, it's just kind of, like, insane.
And I'm curious as to how that process worked and how her theory deals with that.
The reason the slug nut
Secondly,
is talking about chimps is simply because everyone knows chimps are cute and funny, especially when dressed in human cloths. That's the mental capacity we are dealing with.
It's true. He's not making an appeal to nature. He's making an appeal to himself.
when it comes to power, it's very interesting. We've heard Professor Allen, praising humanity to the skies here, but then we discover that actually this very essential element of human nature, the desire to dominate, the libido dominandi, as they say, is an essential quality of humanity.
None of this has anything to do with the question.
And Professor Allen thinks it's bad. She actually wants to reform humanity. She wants to create what used to be called the new Soviet man that would not have.
Also, can we just be real clear here that if this man got what he wanted, like, whoever's the biggest and the strongest in this crowd of men would just beat him to death with a rock? Like, that's, I don't know, like, to me, like, that just kind of seems like the end result of what he's advocating for. Like, he's just like, hey, what if we had politics of the rock? Wouldn't that be great? Just the biggest and strongest wins. Except, like, he thinks he's found, like, a loophole where, like, instead of, like, the physically biggest and strongest, like, human, it's, like, the biggest and strongest armed with technology. And it's just kind of like, you're really stupid, man. This is such a childish ideology.
Have that desire. What I observe when I take Aristotle's three forms of government, monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy, the rule of the one, the rule of the few, and the rule of the many. And I think Aristotle kind of made a mistake by saying, okay, there's 6 forms, there's a good form and a bad form of each. I really like them as neutral qualities because I think all of those sort of forms of power, and they are all forms of power, are very, very important. And the principles, I would translate monarchy, oligarchy, democracy in today's terms into the principles of...
Yeah, again, he's being a pedantic prick and getting, like, purposely muddying the semantics so that he's talking about something completely different with, like, a wild veneer over it. It's really weaselly, and if he was in like any kind of philosophy class, he would be laughed out the doors.
Authority or authoritarianism. I translate...
Is this guy conservative by nature? I don't know if it's by nature, but this guy is literally like a colossal racist and also a fascist. And I'm not saying that in like a hyperbole, like... I mean, he's actually a fascist. He wants actual monarchy, except instead of like some kind of king determined by like, I don't know, like Donald Trump's bloodline or something. He wants like, I don't know, Elon Musk to be the god king. He wants like some rich billionaire asshat in the techno world to be the king. And that's not an exaggeration. And unfortunately, he has the ear of a lot of billionaires.
Oligarchy, as a concept near and dear here at a university that will not be named, as meritocracy or prestige, and I translate democracy as popularity or populism. And so what I see is that all of these forms are active today. And
well, yeah, exactly, Forlorn 79. Like, why would you compare like how like social structures functioned in creatures that existed 10 million years ago to what we have today? Like that doesn't make any sense. Similarly, why would you compare the social structures of like, you know, isolated chimpanzee groups to like humans in a city? Obviously, those social structures are going to be different because you have different creatures in different, like vastly different environments.
Those who believe that our society should be ruled by prestige, by prestigious...
Actually, Kinameric, I think saying that this guy wants Mecha Hitler is basically the nut at the center of his ideology.
Institutions, by civil society, are very, very against authority. But what you notice is that actually those institutions are quite unaccountable. Nobody elected Anthony Fauci. Nobody elected Anthony Fauci.
You're right. Nobody elected him, except he was appointed by elected officials.
When he basically supervised...
He was elected by... he wasn't elected directly, but he was appointed by an elected official. He was approved by elected officials, etc.
The program to invent COVID. Nobody elected Anthony Fauci when he covered it up. Nobody elected Anthony Fauci when he told us to stand 6 feet apart based on some science fair project that nobody actually knows where that number came from.
It's because when you breathe out water droplets. And when when you're sick, those water droplets, if it's airborne, contain the virus or bacteria that can then infect other people. That's why you would want to stand 6 feet apart to minimize the chance of that happening. Because the masks are not 100% foolproof of like preventing that moisture from like leaving and expelling from your face. It's not that difficult to understand why someone would want you to mask and stand relatively farther apart so that you don't infect other people. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straight fucking forward.
And so actually, delegating this authority to prestige, which seemed like a no-brainer earlier in the 20th century, seems like maybe there's actually flaws in meritocracy. Maybe there's flaws.
Well, we don't live in a meritocracy. We live in a flawed democracy. Same as we always have, and we've been gradually making it better for the last 250 some years.
Relying on prestige. And so when we look at what we call democracy today, what I see it as essentially as a sort of guided democracy, the way we talk about Putin's democracy. Putin's democracy is democracy guided by monarchy. Our democracy is democracy guided in the formula that Walter Lippmann came up with about 100 years ago, is democracy guided by prestige, guided by civil society. And I'd like us to address that squarely.
Sure. Professor Allen, just also given time, perhaps if we could focus particularly on what you described as the engineering problems of democracy, which Mr. Yarvin seemed to kind of bring out in the second half of the answer.
I just, to pretend as if this man even attempted to answer her questions, or even attempted to answer the moderator's questions. That was like a load of waffle. It was full of nothing.
Well, and then we were also drifting into our second topic there too, which we're probably getting close to in time.
Yeah.
So I'll just make a very brief comment about Aristotle, because I cannot let it go by having a hash made of Aristotle. That is something I cannot.
See, this is what I mean. He would get laughed out of a philosophy class. Dude, again, a lot of conservative fash like to LARP as fans of Aristotle, fans of Plato. Again, this is where we get earlier tonight I was talking about Leo Strauss. I was talking about Jordan Peterson and I forget what that other guy's name, talking about Aristotle and such. This type of talk would get you laughed out of any room of people that actually have an idea of what you're talking about, This is what happens when you just absorb information and then just shit out complete and utter nonsense.
Because I am very fond of Aristotle. So it's really important. Those 6 forms matter a lot in Aristotle: monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. The division between
Plato fans need to come out of the cave. We have Camus out here. Oh.
the good and bad is the difference between
waffles are good. I'm sorry I besmirched waffles.
People who are ruled versus for the sake of the ruler. And the thing that Aristotle thinks will achieve rule for the sake of the ruler, or rather the ruled, the people who are being ruled, and get them good government is law, limits, and accountability. All right? So that distinction in Aristotle is absolutely critical. The difference is really between tyranny and monarchy, which is a good form because limited, because bound. And monarchies can be limited and bound. Take British constitutional monarchy, take how it developed in the 18th and 19th century. It has produced a form of good rule and good governance for people. Democracy is not the only form that can do that, but limit, rule, those things are necessary and rule of law.
Got it. All right. I think, given where you were going, we can get a little bit into our second topic, which deals directly with Harvard, but it could be interpreted broadly, as Mr. Yarvin was saying, as prestige institutions or civil society. The main question here, resolved: Harvard's model of elite formation, grounded in a contested balance between merit and equality, undermines the democratic legitimacy of the political and cultural systems its graduates go on to shape. Now, given how the coin...
I gotta be honest, I don't know how much I care about this question. I feel like at this point, the rest of this is going to be about Harvard, and I think they have a Q&A at the end. Are you guys, do you guys want to watch the rest of this? Or are we good? Do you want to skip to the Q&A? Where are you guys at? Skip to the Q&A? That's kind of where I'm at. I don't really care about his view of, Harvard. I'm a glutton for punishment, but I'm not that gluttonous. Okay, I'm gonna skip to the Q&A because I'm still interested in that part.
I view the Ukraine war as a tragedy very, very similar to the tragedy of COVID. It's basically unaccountable public policy on, with nothing to stop it. And the fact that...
Yeah, except elected officials.
These authority to misgovern.
Is that right? Professor's in charge. Is his standard for what makes a professor, is that right? Those sorts of questions.
Well, we know for a fact professors aren't in charge because, yeah, obviously. But anyway, I'll come back to that in a second, but I want to go back to the very beginning of that set of remarks when Mr. Yarvin suggested that pluralism and veritas are in conflict with each other. That's not the case. To protect freedom is to generate diversity of thought. James Madison said that. Old idea, others have said it as well. And so to protect freedom and is to generate precisely what you need in order to pursue veritas, namely the conflict of ideas required for competitive consideration of hard questions that are rarely given to certain conclusions. So in that regard, actually pluralism is something that helps advance the cause of veritas. Respecting pluralism and protecting pluralism is beneficial to the project of discovery. The project of discovery always benefits from adversarial structures and competitive structures. And
Get into closing statements. I think they've allotted 5 to 10, perhaps it was 8 minutes. Mr. Yarvin, if you'd like to start your closing remarks.
So okay, I guess I'll settle for closing remarks if they aren't going to have Q&A.
Maybe I can, in my closing remarks, I could do something a little unusual and kind of argue Professor Allen's side, for the moment, because I think we've seen sort of maybe a little too little of. I've been making the case, and I would like to think somewhat successfully, against oligarchy. Not as an abstract system.
Yeah, and 95s work well.
All of the three forms.
I'm just saying they're not
can
100%
work in their own
foolproof.
way in different societies, in different structures. Another name for, the positive name for oligarchy is aristocracy. I think Harvard has always, tried to represent, the rule of the best. And, even you see it recovering from the witch craze of the 1690s. You see it recovering from the wokeness craze of the 2020s. And I think it is capable of recovering, and I want to see it recover. And one of the lessons,
Hey, one idea, then thank you for the $10
Whenever one of
super
these
chat.
asshats brings up Aristotle, Kant, Rothbard, Nietzsche, etc., I want to start infoning interest like yes. I believe it was Socrates who said. And then wallop him.
Now, obviously, I cannot condone any impetus to wallop these people, but I understand. I understand the impulse. Thank you for the $10 super chat. I really, really appreciate it.
One of the things that I say to basically people who are on my side, not that I'm a partisan, I'm just an intellectual. One of the things that I say, to people on my side when I encounter these elite institutions is I'm like,
Oh yeah, Moldbug thinks aristocracy is a positive word because he believes in monarchy.
you sort of go through 3 stages of looking at these institutions. First, you see them very distantly and you see them according to the kind of mythology of the institution. And the mythology of the institution is that there's this incredible cornucopia, this incredible banquet of, intellectual delights. Every form of truth is laid out, et cetera, et cetera. And you get, closer to these things and you start to smell them and you're like, well, especially in certain areas, I'm really looking at a vast dung heap. And that's the attitude that I think many Trump supporters have. They have a very, they're just like, there's nothing here. This needs to be scattered to the wind. I would say look closer at that dung heap and you'll find always in every one of these elite institutions that I have come into contact with, there are real kernels of corn amidst the dung, okay? And these are the seeds of basically the next generation that are, lead to renewal. There are people that really...
Yeah, and look, if you hear me and my words are resonating with you, that's because you're one of the kernels in the shit pile, okay? You're one of the kernels. You're one of the good ones. And, I'm sure that in our coming technocratic monarchy, you'll be a member of the aristocracy because you're a corn kernel. You're a shit-covered corn kernel. You're going to be a member of the aristocracy for sure.
We believe in these values. The values are eternal. Veritas is eternal, and so on and so forth. And when we see, and I believe that I agree with Professor Allen, I believe that there's a capacity for renewal here, but I also believe that it, takes looking...
Oh my God, he does. He looks like an evil Andy Dick. He does. Oh my God. Oh my God. He looks like evil Andy Dick, who traded his soul for a full head of hair.
Very, very hard at what Harvard is and became during the 20th century.
Yeah, Andy Dick is no saint, but also, like, I don't think Andy Dick is like a fucking out-and-out fascist.
Which is very different from what it was in any of the past centuries. And when we, unfortunately, when we sort of put it up against, I've sort of discussed, ad nauseum.
Yeah, that dude, I don't really care. You're probably fine. Just improve your life a little bit.
The virtues of an ideal monarchy. And what we have in the Trump administration is very far from being a monarchy at all, because Trump, as he says, is really a rebel and not an emperor, and he's disrupting a system rather than creating a new system. But also, when we look at that, we see many of the failings of monarchy. And so when we, to come back to my updated Aristotelian trinity, where monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy become authority, prestige, and popularity. We see in the Trump administration, we see these classic tropes of authoritarian populism. And it's not wrong, even though Trump is not Hitler, it's not wrong to say that these are both authoritarian populist regimes, and that there's something brittle and something broken and something questionable and something wrong about authoritarian populism without a backbone of prestige, without a backbone of aristocracy, without institutions. And I would say, just as the sort of the challenge of these...
Yeah, when you are looking at society, you need your authoritarianism, you need your oligarchy, and you need your democracy. Of course, that totally makes sense, except you have to mangle the definitions of all three of those things to arrive at what you're proposing, which is something completely different. Just codified monarchy. Like, fuck, man, this guy sucks.
Institutions is to renew themselves. The challenge of the enemies of these institutions is to explain where we go from here and how that prestige is regenerated, and whether it's generated, by the kernels of corn, sprouting again into a new beautiful cornfield, whether it's represented by new institutions is unclear. But what is clear is that prestigious institutions are necessary and essential. Prestige is essential. Democracy, in my strict meaning of the word democracy, populism is not enough. Authority is not enough. Veritas is necessary. Institutions are necessary. Institutions that filter truth from error through our Darwinian process. Which is the ideal of science, which is a very, very...
That's not the ideal of science. Science is a fucking method. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. The fact that he's this stupid and he has the ear of like half the billionaires in this country is deeply troubling. Like, I don't think none of these people know what they're talking about or what they're doing, or like how full of shit this guy is. It's insane. He's literally calling his own followers shit.
Valid ideal are necessary, but when you see Veritas, there are many, many examples of this in science that do not involve killing 20 million people, that just involve, wasting a lot of time. I guess I always use the amyloid hypothesis as my example of that. You basically see a really considerable amount of redirection that needs to take place and restructuring that needs to take place to serve these ideals. Whether that restructuring takes place as a result of an internal process of renewal or an external process of forced renewal is, I think, very, very unclear in the historical situation in which we exist. But I would, and I hope we can agree on this, institutions like the university that we're at are necessary and essential, and a lot of change is needed within them.
Thank you.
Man, it's so crazy that he can recognize that there are certain institutions that are relatively essential that can be improved via reforms, but he thinks you should just destroy all of democracy because it's flawed as well and should instead have an even more flawed form of governance. That's insane to me.
You, Professor Allen?
Thank you. We can agree that universities like this are essential and have a distinguished history and also have available to them a distinguished future, that they do also have within them already the energies and dynamism of renewal. The question really, I think, is about the broader context. What are those institutions contributing to? Are they contributing to the ongoing life of a free society for free and equal self-governing citizens, or for an alternative? One of the arguments in Mr. Yarvin's book is that Hitler and Stalin gave absolute monarchs a bad name. And in his argument, they gave absolute monarchs a bad name because, in his argument, they were driven to excess, the excesses of the Holocaust and the gulags, because of existential threats from the Anglo-American alliance. Now, this is not good history of the unfolding of the totalitarian.
Oh, I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked that this guy has an incredibly poor grasp of history. I'm so shocked. You know, I thought after all this, he might be able to nail one thing. And, wow, I'm just so totally shocked that he somehow just fucked up literally every aspect of his argument. Cool, yeah, all right. You mean this guy who looks like the most divorced dude you've ever seen in your life got literally nothing right in his analysis? This guy who's just been, like, talking, like, nonsense for, like, a goddamn hour? This guy? I don't believe it.
Impacts of Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. So I say that to make the point that as we consider the future of institutions of civil society, we have to be equally clear-eyed and honest about what we can and should desire in our political institutions. Absolute monarchy is not a path to the protection of freedom. In that regard, we need the same.
That's true, Gamerman. He doesn't have to be right. There's no law that says he has to be correct.
Same thing, both in our political institutions and in our civil society institutions. We need renovation in our universities. We need renovation in our democracy. But in both cases, we should absolutely preserve the anchors for human freedom.
Well, thank you very much to both Professor Allen and Mr. Yarvin. I believe right after this, we'll have food.
Yeah, exactly, Nomi Sunrider. Like, oh, that poor little Hitler, he would have been okay if it hadn't been for those mean American kids. Little Hitler, what a scamp. That might be too deep of a cut. Real quick, just so that you guys know that I'm not pulling that out of my ass.
My teacher? Yes, little Hitler? My desk is small. I need this Polish boy's desk also.
Little Hitler,
yeah. Anyway,
drinks,
it's from Robot Chicken.
Across the hall,
exactly.
If I have that right. We have it until 10 p.m. Thank you all very much for coming out, and see you all soon.
Not from Animaniacs? No. It's from Robot Chicken. Ah. It's finally done. Fuck this clown. I wish they had done a Q&A. I imagine Curtis Yarvin really doesn't like doing Q&As. But, or maybe he does, and he just likes hearing himself. Yeah, I don't know. But, do you think this debate swayed anyone? I think anyone who came in not knowing what that guy was talking about, or came in not knowing that guy, definitely is not swayed by him. I genuinely, he offered no real rebuttals other than, what if I redefine all of your words and, imagine that it means a different thing, and, what about chimpanzees? That's not good argumentation. I don't think that actually convinces anybody. Would it have helped if she kept pointing out that Yarvin never answered any of the questions? I think she should have done that more. Yeah, in a few instances, she seemed like she did, but there was one in which she was basically like, "This guy's full of shit, and you shouldn't listen to him." And I think that's more of that should have been said, but can't win them all. Yeah, I don't know. Even if you're one of his devotees, being called corn and shit is kind of I don't know. That might be a cause to question your position in his movement, I hate that people are allowed to talk like this in public spaces without being laughed at and mocked out of the building. Look, if you see Curtis Yarvin in public, be the laughter you want to see in the world. Anyway, that's Curtis Yarvin. And honestly, I thought Professor Danielle Allen did pretty goddamn well in that. I felt like I was being negged the entire time by Yarvin. I don't know if I'm the only one. Well, that kind of makes sense because like he's red pill manosphere adjacent. It makes sense to me.
Riverboat deck is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, gaming, plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord. Riverboat Jack.